At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby. Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Hey there, travelers. Kaylee Cuoco here. Sorry to interrupt your music, great artist BT Dubs, but wouldn't you rather be there to hear it live? With Priceline, you can get out of your dreams and into your dream concert. They've got millions of travel deals to get you to that festival, gig, rave, soundbath, or sonic experience you've been dreaming of. Download the Priceline app today, and you can save up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights. So don't just dream about that trip. Book it with Priceline.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Outward, Slate's podcast about LGBTQ life, culture, and politics. I'm Bryan Lowder. I'm an editor at Slate, and this week we'll be focused on that last area because I know I don't have to tell you this. The American government has really been pushing it on us these last few months, to say the least. Specifically, we'll consider a state-level bill in Iowa called HF 2082 that was signed into law at the end of February that did something shocking and very much not in a good way. The legislation, which was introduced by right-wing culture crusader Representative Stephen Holt, removed gender identity from the Iowa Civil Rights Act, where it had been a category protected alongside others like race and disability all the way back to 2007. The law also, following in the wake of Trump's similar executive order, redefined legal gender as strictly binary, just male and female, based on reproductive anatomy identified at birth, which, as we've been covering on the show, has the effect of making it impossible for the government to recognize the gender diversity of the real world in official documents and publications and formal discourse. But the real headline here is the revocation clearly due to prejudice of rights and protections that had already been granted to a marginalized group. Now, this is a frightening new frontier in the anti-trans and queer backlash we're living through, and the law's passage will surely act as encouragement to other states to give the same move a shot. And it may trigger constitutional challenges that will eventually make it up to the Supreme Court, which, as we know, is very conservative at the moment. It's worth noting that queer and trans Iowans did not let this happen without a fight. Thousands of protesters gathered at the state capitol against the law's passage. They continue to speak out about the impact the change will have on their lives, including forcing many to consider leaving the state entirely in the run-up to the date it goes into effect, which is July 1st. To understand those impacts and to get some context for the strategy behind this bill, as well as to see where it fits into the broader sweep of American civil rights history, I'm joined today by two guests, both of whom have made careers dedicated to LGBTQ and racial justice, Dr. David Johns and Hope Giselle and Dr. You'll definitely want to hear what they have to say about what this bill means for Iowa and for the rest of the nation, so stay with us.
Oh, Outward listeners, here's some scoop for you. So what is it, you ask? It's that Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Now, before anyone goes suggesting this is just rumor, know that there's actual proof this kettle of tea is not only piping hot, but 100% true. So yeah, sometimes it pays to be a little nosy, but it always pays to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. Oh, Outward listeners, here's some scoop for you. So what is it, you ask? It's that Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Now, before anyone goes suggesting this is just rumor, know that there's actual proof this kettle of tea is not only piping hot, but 100% true. So yeah, sometimes it pays to be a little nosy, but it always pays to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
right, we are back. First, we have Hope Giselle and Dr. Hope is a nationally recognized organizer, author, and activist dedicated to trans advocacy, racial justice, and workplace inclusion. She is the founder of the Allow Me movement, the training director at Get Fluid, and has worked with organizations like NASA, the HRC, and Trans Tech Social to amplify marginalized voices. We're lucky to have her on the show today. Hope, welcome to Outward.
Thank you for having me.
And second, we have Dr. David Johns. Dr. Johns is the CEO of the National Black Justice Collective and a longtime advocate for Black LGBTQ+ communities. He previously led the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans under President Obama and has shaped education policy on Capitol Hill. Additionally, he has some direct experience with Iowa, having worked as a policy advisor to Iowa's own Senator Tom Harkin. Welcome, Dr. Johns. Thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you for having me and my sister.
I just want to start with the basics. At the top of the show, I did describe a little bit of what happened with this law in Iowa, HF 2082. But I was hoping, for the benefit of our listeners, you all could tell us what went down there. It goes into effect later this summer. What's going to happen when it goes into effect? And also, how did it come about in this state in particular? Because, as I mentioned at the top of the show, gender identity was protected in Iowa since like 2007. So can you just set the scene a little bit about what happened in Iowa with this bill?
So this bill, which also some people might find referenced as Senate File 482, which Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds signed into law of last month or March 2025, is a historic first, and that is the first time that a state has stripped away civil rights protections that were already granted to a marginalized group. In 2007, Iowa added gender identity to its Civil Rights Act, which effectively provided transgender people, transgender Iowans to be more specific, with protections in employment, housing, education, and public accommodations. And so this new law removes those protections. And this isn't just another harmful bill, right? I want to acknowledge that the last legislative cycle, so 2023 to 2024, we're in a new legislative cycle now, but it was the most prolific with regard to the number of I would argue, Democratic, anti-Black, and QIA plus bills in this country, with the vast majority of that last group of bills targeting LGBTQIA plus folks or folks who are trans, queer, gender expansive. I would argue those of us who have superpowers targeting specifically trans individuals, especially with regard to their earned right in this case, to take up space in schools and public housing, and to be able to do the things that are required to fully participate in our democratic society more generally. For me, a lot of this is challenging, as you mentioned in the intro. I'm thankful to have served our country as a senior policy advisor to the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. And after the death of Ted Kennedy, rest his soul, Tom Harkin became the chair of Iowa, and I was introduced to what they call God's country, and can appreciate what in this moment is a tension between the moral leadership that Iowans have clearly demonstrated that they have the ability to. Iowa was one of the first states to provide affirming rights to LGBTQIA plus folks. Of course, coastal states like California, where I'm from. And so I want to be clear, they've demonstrated that they can stand 10 toes down on business, as the kids would say. Also in this moment, what we're experiencing is a political tensions that I would argue are reflected in the passage of this bill, which again strips hard-earned rights and should concern everybody. In this moment, if I say nothing else, I want people to hear my heart when I say that I want everyone to be asking the question, if you yourself are not trans, which simply means that you disagree with the assigned gender that a doctor guessed at birth. That is what this all comes down to. When we move away from the fact that trans folks have become politicized to no fault of their own, and I'm so thankful. I want to make space for hope. But I hope that everyone who is not trans, who has the privilege of being cisgendered in this moment and feeling protected, as if this won't affect you, it's who next? Who next? Right? Fascist regimes don't stop; they don't capitulate power, and we should all be clear that democracies are eroded slowly. This work happens in the daylight and at night. And if we allow for any group amongst us, whether that's people with disabilities, women, people for whom English is not their first language, I could go down the list. But if we allow any group to be subhumanized legally, we consent to that happening to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope, I actually wanted to take the conversation to you next because, I think sometimes when we talk about gaining or losing rights or protections in this case, those words can feel a little abstract. But these things have real tangible impacts on people's lives. I wondered if you could speak to those sort of material effects that losing these protections will have on trans and non-binary people in Iowa. What are like the stakes of this actually like on the ground?
So let's talk about the fact that this sets us up for the rest of these folks who have already been thinking, feeling, kind of sort of having these backdoor sidebar conversations around what they want to do and how they want to eradicate trans people from their states and their government legislation. It gives them a little bit of a push to say, oh, Iowa did it and they were successful. And so we're able to do this. And also, I think that one of the things that bears naming is the fact that it took them less than an hour. Right. These people went and had a bathroom break, ate a half of a Subway sandwich and came back and said, all right, here we go, And it's one of those things where when we can think about the fact that it took them less than an hour to strip civil rights from a community, imagine what they're going to do when we do start to go down that line that Dr. David Johns just named, right? When we start to talk about civil rights for Black folk, when we start to talk about voting rights for women and other marginalized groups of people, when we even think about the fact that the SAVE Act, right, which we were fighting so hard to not get passed, has just gotten passed. There are millions of women who got their name changed last year in a marriage that are now not going to be able to possibly vote because they haven't gotten their passports updated. And we also see what's happening with passports. And so when we think about what's happening to trans people, we need to think about this in a way that's a little bit more intentional than this is happening to this specific group of people. This is a setup for what they want to be able to use as justification for when they do it to other people. Because they're going to say, when we did it to trans people, you clapped. When we did it to Black people, you cheered in the streets. When we did it to the migrants, you ran around and you waved your flags. Now that we're doing it to people that look like you, there is no balance for you being able to say, well, this doesn't make sense now. Because again, we have a track record showing where this made sense when we were doing it to others, right? And I think that for the most part, a lot of trans people are under this space of extreme scrutiny because we're not just trans. People always want to talk to us about our trans identity. I am a daughter. I'm a wife. I plan to be a mother soon. There are so many other parts of my identity that folks are not talking about, not to mention the fact that, again, I'm Black, right? And so when I think about the ways in which they're coming for SNAP benefits, when I think about the way that they're coming for Section 8 and all of those things, my mom has been able to survive all of Section 8. My grandmother, like there are generations of my family that don't know what it's like to pay a full rent without the assistance of the government. And while some people might be ashamed of that, I'm not, because I'm a product of that system that's been able to come out and not have to seek governmental assistance because my parents did what they needed to do. But if they cut those things off, then what happens, right? If they start to roll back DEI in schools, my little sister goes to a private school where she's there on scholarship. She's one of the brightest students at that school, but that means that she might not be able to go there anymore, not because she's not great, not because she failed to meet her requirements as a student, but because there are a group of people that deem it unfair that a little Black girl who is not necessarily given the same advantages as her peers gets to have what they call a leg up, right? And so I think that as we talk about the ways in which trans people are being affected because of our transness, we need to also talk about the way that a lot of us are being forced to quit our jobs because we now have to become caretakers of grandma. We now have to, quit our jobs and go back to sex work, which was already a thing that was being criminalized in and of itself, because we have to now take care of our siblings because our mom can't afford to do it anymore because Section 8 was taking care of most of the rent and now she has to pick up more shifts at the hospital, right? There are so many things that go into our trans existence outside of the fact that we are just trans, and we are not just afraid that our transness is going to be erased and eradicated. There are so many people that call me a man online every single day. I'm not worried about that, but I am worried about the tangible benefits that are going to be lost due to transmissia being used as the golden horse or the Trojan horse, if you will.
Right, exactly.
I want to be clear in connecting the dot between what feels like a new moment and a tried and true strategy that we should be clear about is continuing to be played out. The same playbook that has been used in Iowa was used after the Civil War during Reconstruction, when Black Americans were granted citizenship, voting rights, and equal protection under the law through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Schools and public accommodations were integrated to Hope's reflections on her sister and the importance of all children having a constitutional right to a quality education. But this is a time where we Black folks were were fighting for the right to vote. Within a decade of what some might have called the nadir, this high point for Black folks, we saw a systematic dismantling of these rights. First, there were separate but equal doctrines. Then there were restrictions like poll taxes and literacy tests. And all of this stuff was justified under the banner of states' rights arguments and this moral panic that was at that point anchored in fears around integration. And one could argue that those fears still exist now. And so today's anti-trans strategies follow this pattern, create moral panic about trans people in bathrooms or sports, pass laws that strip away protections piece by piece, and then using the courts to institutionalize discrimination. How is this going to affect Black folks in Iowa? So I want to introduce some data acknowledging how important.
Please, yes.
But also want to underscore that Hope's experience as a lived experience is a form of data. But Black Iowans comprise only 4.1% of the state's population. We're talking about 132,000 people concentrated in just a few cities. So for Black trans Iowans, this means even greater isolation with fewer community resources. So Black Iowans already face a median household income of some 36% compared to 65% of white Iowans. So it's almost double. And so we should anticipate is that for Black trans people in Iowa, they will be denied even more access to housing in fewer communities where they might find acceptance. They're going to be refused service at the limited number of businesses that exist in the area that they might occupy or have access to. They might be fired from jobs in a state where Black unemployment is already 2.5 times higher than white unemployment. And I want to be clear that so there might be some folks who are like, well, I'm not Black, I'm not trans, I don't live in Iowa. Let's make clear that this affects all of us. So for Iowa specifically, they have a $200 billion GDP and a growing tech sector in places like Des Moines. Economists project potential losses of up to $450 million annually through reduced tourism, convention cancellations, business relocations, and a talent exodus. So the gag is that politicians are claiming that these bills protect certain groups, but in actuality, they harm everyone. And so we should be clear that discrimination doesn't create prosperity. In fact, it destroys it. And there are so many other examples of this, including in North Carolina.
In North Carolina, are you talking about HB2 in that case?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it was defeated by folks working in coalition, but not without the state of North Carolina suffering economic negative impacts in the process.
All right, I think that's a great place to take a short break, but we will be back with more from Hope and Dr. Johns right after that.
There's a good chance you're dealing with a middleman, like me, when you get your medicines. That's because PBMs and insurers are often the same company. We even own big chain pharmacies and are buying your doctor's office. We decide what medicines you can get, where you get them, and how much you pay. It's a win-win. For me.
When middlemen own it all, you lose. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
24 chefs, 24 culinary showdowns for 24 hours straight. Which chef will outcook, outpace, outlast the competition?
No chef
escapes the clock. Season premiere, 24 and 24, Last Chef Standing, Sunday, April 27th at 8. See it first on Food Network. Stream next day on Max.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the broader strategy behind this. So Iowa seems to be sort of maybe called the test case for this, for the right to try to do the specific thing, which is, again, revoking rights that had already been granted. What is y'all's understanding of the structure of that strategy? Like, who is driving this? Where is the legislation sort of coming from within the GOP, like the broader institutional framework for advancing this specific kind of thing? This is the first one. they're going to try again elsewhere. How is that spreading sort of going to happen?
Right. It starts with the fear mongering and the fear tactic. And you want to be able to build a strong social case for something that you're trying to get folks to buy into.
Right.
Because if the constituents are going to raise hell against you, you're not going to be able to get anybody to actually believe that this is going to be justifiable. They're trying to justify this by also integrating the news cycle with all of these different versions of stories around trans people being harmful or being scary or causing chaos or a ruckus. And these are things that they do strategically. I don't think that there's a single person that this is coming from or a single group of people that this is coming from in the GOP. Is coming from the vast majority of them that understand. Right? We can understand how people want to function socially. We can then help them to push how we want to move judicially. And I think that what they're doing is they're trying to be didactic in the way of hate, right? If we teach you how to hate these people, if we teach you why these people are wrong, if we teach you why these people are going to come and steal your womanhood or, make your manhood and security for you even more than it already is based on the way that we navigate men in this world, we can get you to vote against your own best interests for the sake of being able to think that you're doing yourself a service in one small inch of a thing that you're not going to likely come into contact with. Studies from GLAAD says that 1 in 8 people say that they have never even met a trans person or are not in community with trans people. Yeah. So when we think about the fact that 1 in 8 people, that's a lot of people that say that they've never met a trans person to be voting in the ways that they're voting. And it's not because these people genuinely feel or have had negative experience. It's because they are being indoctrinated with this media and this social push that's happening so that way when they do put these things in place, like these civil rights protections rollbacks, that people are going to say, well, I saw this on the news. And it's not just a trans thing. When it comes down to things like this, you also understand that people don't care about facts when the person on the other end of that fact happens to be a Black, a brown, a trans, a queer, a person that they don't necessarily understand. So we have to be mindful that they are banking on the idea of public ignorance and then also public hatred that they are also pumping through the media ways and ensuring exists in order to be able to pass these things. They're not smart. They just understand their consumer. And their consumer is not smart. They just understand that they have one goal, and that goal is to remain in a place of supremacy, right, for as long as they can.
Let me offer another Black fact. Hope mentioned the GLAAD study. We found by research that we commissioned in partnership with a number of other organizations, including the National LGBTQ Task Force, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and GLSEN, that 72% of Black Americans, which is consistent with the same percentage of all Americans, say that they don't know someone who's trans. It's a little bit higher, right? Like closer to 75%, right? Like we all have opportunities to be intentional and engaging in developing relationships with people who have diverse experiences. And I mean diverse with a capital D. That is one of the things that makes our very fragile and very young democracy as powerful as it has been. It's also why there are organizations like Moms for Liberty cosplaying as people who care about liberty, hacking schools because they understand the connection that Hope just made and that Bell Hooks talks about, which is that too often we don't teach and people forget that democracies have to be defended by each generation, and education is midwife, it being education, it being democracy in that context. To go back to this, I want to be clear that as Hope described, this is all a part of a coordinated strategy with a clear purpose. That purpose is to preserve systems of power and privilege by dividing marginalized, minoritized communities and have us fighting with each other and doing the job of the oppressor. This clearly palpable and present when we think about Project 2025 and similar blueprints, America First. Let's be clear that these things are not new, but the strategies around attacking transgender rights alongside attacks on racial justice initiatives, educational freedom, and worker rights is not just coincidental, right? And so just to draw this again, I'm a former elementary school and college professor. I also worked in Congress as like managing an elementary school classroom. What I think about often is that when trans students experience are politicized in schools, it undermines education for everyone, right? Students preoccupied with basic safety can't focus on learning. The same is true for employees. They can't focus on productivity. I just want everybody to consider this. You asked about who's behind this. I want to name ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is responsible for drafting a lot of this legislation and sharing it with leaders, political parties across state lines, often with typos and errors included. But I want people to be clear that in February of this year, 2025, the bill passed the Republican-controlled Senate along party lines. And in March 2025, the bill passed Republican-controlled House with a particular representative, Amy Wichendahl, who was Iowa's first openly transgender legislator, draw a powerful speech against it, but it still passed along party lines. 0.6% of Iowans that we know of, I want to be clear, people often do this, there's 1% of the population that we know of. What I know about how identity works is that there are a lot of people who identify and exist in ways that they will never
report on a survey,
including because of all of the reasons based on where we are in this geopolitical moment. But 6.6% of Iowans identify as transgender. That's 20,000 people. I want someone to riddle me why the legislature is prioritizing attacking trans folks given all of the issues that the state faces. It's not by happenstance. Brian Stevenson would say in this moment that systems work as designed, and moral panic being used to drive disadvantaged communities apart is a strategy that they are banking on continuing to work.
I think we also have to note and name that in a press conference recently, they were called out by constituents who said that they have some of the worst failing school districts. They have some of the worst homeless issues and all of these different things, but they're focusing on these trans issues. And mind you, this video showcased a room full of people who were still wearing their MAGA gear, right? So this is not a room full of, leftist activists that came to this space. This was a room that was intentionally full of people from the right that were adorned in their, MAGA gear. So these were not people that were planted. And so when we think about the fact that some of these folks are waking up and saying okay, I understand I may not want these people to play sports. And also, why are we still failing in our school districts? Why are we still having the highest rate of, all of these different outbreaks that are happening? Why are we still spending 4 hours in the emergency room? And these were coming from their constituents. And so when I think about the idea that, again, 75% of people are saying that they have not even ever met a trans person, but we want to prioritize the fact that trans people are this big boogeyman and this big to-do and problem, it makes me wonder why we're not prioritizing white men as an issue or a boogeyman, considering that most harmful crimes are committed by heterosexual cisgender identified white men.
See the most recent school shootings. I mean, evidence.
No, it is an appropriate question. One thing that we should note, there was protests in the state. About thousands of people showed up to protest the passing of this bill, and trans people in the state continue to speak out about it. From your perspective as an organizer, what would you say are the best strategies or tactics to, I don't know exactly what the right word is, maybe resist, maybe just survive, fight, whichever one of those you want to pick up on, something like this. And again, because we know it's not just in Iowa, it is a strategy that is going to be tried out and probably successful, in other states in this country as well. So how would you think about, for our listeners, organizing against it or sort of,
Understanding that we can't do this work alone is going to be our biggest thing. What I just said to you is that there was a room full of MAGA folks that were able to understand and kind of sort of bring it home. And I think that what we find is that in a room where there are leftist activists that come into those spaces, they're often arrested, they're often hauled out for the sake of there being a media moment around it. These, right-wing MAGA supporters were not hauled off, even though they were definitely not letting up on the answers to their questions. And the reason why is because that does not sell magazine covers. That does not help any organization on Fox be able to continue to promote the harmful rhetoric that they're trying to promote, which is that all Americans want this life where these are the main issues, right? And so I think that first and foremost, when I think about organizing, you have to do your research. Know your enemy, know the opposition better than you almost know yourself, because that is going to help you be able to figure out what the strategy is going to be. Because when you know what they're going to do next, you know how to get in front of that versus trying to focus on being retaliatory. That's one thing. Number two is knowing and understanding your rights, because when you are doing protesting and when you're enacting a peaceful protest while being a minority person or minority people, you have to also understand that your rights go down significantly, and the way that you're able to use, weaponize, justify the law is going to be very different than the way that our white cis accomplices are going to be able to do that. And so if you're going to do so in spaces where you don't have those people present, it's going to be really important that you make sure that you have observers. It's going to be really important that you make sure that you're not just going out there with your signs and you don't know who was coming along for the ride. Organizing in spaces that are not public. I know that we all want to hop on Instagram and invite everybody to the meeting, but sometimes it's going to have to be a word of mouth. Learning certain apps and things that are encrypted. Learning to start, if we are all in the same community, it's okay for us to write letters, right? We don't have to put everything into, a text message or an email. A letter will take a day. We have to understand that Slow and steady wins the race because that's how they did this. They didn't write Project 2025 over, a year. They didn't write it over a couple of months. They took their time and the help of ChatGPT and they really buckled down and, got Project 2025 together. And I think that when we're thinking about organizing, researching, knowing your opposition, and then also knowing how you can use those things to benefit you in ways that are not going to cause harm are going to be most beneficial. But also understanding that resistance does not just look like protesting, right? Resistance also looks like being able to galvanize your accomplices and go up to the hill and embarrass them. These people don't care about our rights. They don't care about humanity. They've made that very, very clear. What they do care about, though, is the public opinion of how they're perceived. What they do care about is how their pockets are going to be affected. So if we make it so that everybody in Iowa is showing the investors that want to bring, another 17 Chick-fil-A's to the area that's going to bring $2.2 million, if we let these people who want to invest in 4 more Marriott properties know that Iowans are not in support of this and we're not going to be supporting the tourism more than it's not already being supported, that is when folks start to get their mind right. That is when these Republicans start to say, hey, it's affecting my pockets now. So also knowing how to play the game with these people. Organizing does not always look like standing in front of the police and getting pepper sprayed. Sometimes it looks like being able to say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and reach out to these people that I see are building this new building downtown. I'm going to reach out to the investors and say, how would you like it if we came to your building every single day and protested in front of it once it was built, right? Because that's a very likelihood of something like that happening. Those investors then go to those people and say, hey, your constituents are saying that they're going to boycott our building and that's not going to be good for business. So we're going to move this $2.5 million project to another place. That is how we organize. And there's not a lot of people talking about organizing that does not include this very front end sort of deal. I think that it's also going to be important that people understand what the game plan is for where we can go in the event that we do have to relocate and become, these silos of groups that happen to travel and do things in a different way. We're not in a space where we can be safe anymore and assume that this government is going to play by the rules because they've shown us that they will not. They've shown us that they do not care about our protection. And so these are things that I think that a lot of us have to understand, that organizing can't just be against the system. It has to be for the community. Are we organizing and building funds and money while people still have it left in their DEI accounts to be able to relocate people? Are we organizing and making sure that folks are educated about their rights? Are we organizing and making sure people know what phrases that you say should you be unlawfully arrested? Are we organizing and making sure that we have pro bono lawyers that are available to these people? And so as we're out here fighting the resistance, as we're out here trying to navigate what it looks like to be in this fight, I think that especially as TGNC people and especially as TGNC people that hold more than one marginalized identity, that we have to also be thinking about what the next plan is going to be and how to stay safe in areas where white trans folks are not necessarily going to experience the same thing that you're going to experience. And being able to name that reality in a room where we are organizing with white trans folks that understand that isn't going to crumble our entire operation because now it becomes the oppression Olympics, right? So going into this, we have to know that while we are all fighting for the same outcome, the way that fight is going to look is going to be different for each other. And we have to respect that going into the organizing process rather than finding it out along the way and having it disrupt the work.
I guess maybe what I would like to do now is just ask if there are any final thoughts either of you would like to leave us with about this issue. I think we've talked a lot about sort of what I was going to ask about, what's the end game here? And I think we've sort of addressed that and what the broader strategy is. But are there any final thoughts or anything I haven't asked about that you think is important that we should definitely include in this discussion?
Trans people, allies, accomplices, parents, stop going into these rooms thinking that they care about your trans child. Stop going in there thinking that they care about your trans identity. They don't. There are intersections that you can use that they do care about. There are heartstrings that you can tug that do matter to them. If you are a caretaker, that matters. If you're somebody that suffers with diabetes, if you're somebody that suffers with breast cancer, if you're somebody who has had a benign tumor of some sorts, those things count. When we're talking about healthcare, they don't care that you can't get your estrogen. They don't care that, you're having a mental breakdown because your breasts are starting to grow back due to lack of testosterone or hormone blockers or whatever the case may be. They don't care about that stuff. But if you tell them that, as a 9-to-5 worker in the tech field, that you are not going to be able to work for IBM in a way that's going to be conducive as the VP of whatever, right? That matters. Those are things that matter. If you tell them that as a parent, who just so also happens to be the VP of whatever major thing in that city, and you can't focus because you're worried every single day that when you send your child to school that they might not come home, because we've seen the story of Next Benedict, and we saw what they said about the fact that we will not bring this filth, right? This is a child that we were talking about. And at that time, this was a child post-mortem that we were talking about. So we see that these people don't care about your transness. We have to start to name our intersections and ways that they're going to be able to humanize us, because that is also their lived experience. If you cannot connect with the opposition, if you cannot give them a reason to see you and them on the same playing field, you lose the argument before you even start, because they stop listening as soon as they realize that they can continue to other you. But when they realize that, wait a minute, you go through that too, there's more people that are then willing to listen to your plight, because it feels like something that hits home for them and not something that is only going to be adjacent and affect you and the people that love you and your filthy little lifestyle. And I think that as we continue to organize and as we continue to talk and as we continue to show up in these board meetings, and as I know so many of you all are taking time, out every week to do this, think about reframing the way that you present these arguments, because the more people that you can get from that right side of that room to say, wait a minute, hold up, the more allies that you might have when it comes down to a vote. And next time, it might take them a little bit less than an hour and a half of a sandwich to decide that they want to strip your rights away.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Johns, did you have anything?
I do, and now Hope has me wanting a sandwich. What I just want to name some of the criticism that I imagine people are sitting with. I want to address these concerns directly because they deserve thoughtful engagement. So first, regarding women's spaces, transgender women have been using women's facilities in Iowa for 19 years, nearly 19 years, under the previous civil rights protections without a single documented case of the feared scenario. Multiple studies, including one from the Williams Institute at UCLA, examined jurisdictions with transgender protections and found zero increases in safety incidents in public facilities. The idea that this is designed to protect folks is simply a data-informed lie. Threatens women's safety is forcing transgender women into men's spaces. Transgender women are not men. When policies are passed like this that don't regard their full humanity, they face incredibly high rates of assault. So according to the transgender survey, nearly 47% of transgender people report being sexually assaulted at some point in their lives, with rates even higher for Black trans women. So if we're going to talk about protecting women, we need to include all women. So that's one part of the argument. Now, regarding children, medical consensus from doctors who take a Hippocratic oath, not elected officials who don't know much about medicine, all affirm that supporting transgender young people with age-appropriate care, it's health care. It is not gender-affirming care has become a politicization. It is a tactic, a tool. This is about healthcare that a doctor who takes a Hippocratic oath is saying that a child needs. What we know is that improves mental health outcomes and reduces suicidal ideation and risks. I want our conversations to be anchored in providing the care that is carefully monitored by medical professionals in consultation with families in the context of medical considerations, but also that which is provided by educated, culturally competent and supported educators. So related to this, creating conditions where children are unable to see windows and mirrors that affirm the most important parts of who they are and how they make the world that they haven't been invited into is a thing that harms them most. We know, again, based on data, that LGBTQ youth whose families and communities reject them are nearly 10 times more likely to attempt suicide over the course of their life. And so if you hear me say nothing else in this moment, hear me say that these bills do not address, quote, safety concerns. They manufacture. Right. And if we want to protect women and children in particular, let's focus on evidence-based approaches like comprehensive sex education, consent education, and then strengthening social support systems that allow us to have the kinds of communities where we can do more of this work. The last thing that I think is important given the nature of this conversation is to name some of the things that are giving me hope. There are collectives that are forming across traditional divides. So we're seeing white, rural faith communities in Iowa standing alongside urban, Black, LGBTQIA+, and same-gender loving organizations in the state in places like Waterloo, Iowa, where almost 20% of the residents are Black, multiracial organizing is a kind of power building that transcends single issue politics. And the last thing that I know about all of this is that today's backlash, what we're experiencing now, is a response, it's a reflection to our incredible progress. So I want us all to be anchored in appreciating the teaching of Fannie Lou Hamer, who reminds us that none of us are free unless and until.
I think that's a great place to leave the conversation for today. I've been talking with Hope Giselle and Dr. David Johns. Thank you both so much for being here. Can you share with our listeners where they can just follow y'all's work, where they can keep up with what you're doing?
So you can follow me at Hope Giselle on pretty much everything. You just type in Hope Giselle, or you can visit hopegiselle.com, and that'll have all of my socials and things of that nature.
I should be clear because of the moment we're in politically and the posture of the occupant of the Oval Office, that these remarks shared are those of mine. They are not a reflection of the National Black Justice Collective. I'm speaking in my personal capacity. Folks can engage with me as such at Dr. David Johns across all platforms. I also host my own podcast called Teach the Babies, and would love for folks to think about continuing some of these conversations there. Should you be interested in the work of the National Black Justice Collective, parts of which I reference, including our Black Fact Study, but again, the comments here are my own. You can learn more about that work at nbjc.org or at NBJC on the Move across social platforms.
All right, excellent. Thank you both so much again for being here. This has been great.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, that is it for the main show today, but there's always more Outward over in the Slate Plus feed. If you're not already a subscriber, remember that by joining Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on all of our shows, and you will never hit a paywall on the Slate site. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of the Outward show page, or you can visit slate.com/Outward Plus to get access wherever you listen. As always, please send us feedback and topic ideas at outwardpodcast@slate.com. Our show is produced by Palace Shaw. If you like Outward, please subscribe in your podcast app. Tell everyone in your life about it, friends, lovers, and have them rate and review the show so that others can join and we can grow even bigger. Until next week, stay gay, everybody.
I'm Leon Nafok, and I'm the host of Slow Burn, Watergate. Before I started working on this show, everything I knew about Watergate came from the movie All the President's Men. Do you remember how it ends? Woodward and Bernstein are sitting at their typewriters, clacking away. And then there's this rapid montage of newspaper stories about campaign aides and White House officials getting convicted of crimes, about audio tapes coming out that prove Nixon's involvement in the cover-up. The last story we see is Nixon resigns. It takes a little over a minute in the movie. In real life, it took about 2 years.
5 men were arrested early Saturday while trying to install eavesdropping equipment. It's known as the Watergate incident.
What was it like to experience those 2 years in real time? What were people thinking and feeling as the break-in at Democratic Party headquarters went from a weird little caper to a constitutional crisis that brought down the president? The downfall of Richard Nixon was stranger, wilder, and more exciting than you can imagine. Over the course of 8 episodes, this show is going to capture what it was like to live through the greatest political scandal of the 20th century. With today's headlines once again full of corruption, collusion, and dirty tricks, it's time for another look at the gate that started it all. Subscribe to Slow Burn now, wherever you get your podcasts.